Good evening, everyone, and sorry for the slight delay to the start of the meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Overview Committee. We're now recording of the online streaming. I'm Councillor Paul Prentice, Chair of this committee, and the Overview Committee undertakes pre-decision scrutiny of reports going to the Cabinet on the Council's policies, projects, budget and services. And I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. And if you're seated in the public gallery, it's possible that the cameras may capture your image. If you wish to avoid being filmed, it is recommended you make a member of staff aware who can direct you where to sit. And we also have present at this meeting from the Cabinet, Councillor Pip Hazelton, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing, and also I see Alan Baldock, Councillor Alan Baldock, who is the leader of the Council. And they're here to observe the debate as part of our early engagement before decisions are taken. Welcome Councillor Heaver as well to Overview Committee, because I think this is her first Overview Committee this evening. There is no fire alarm planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. Two of the closest exits are through the glass door behind you to my left and through the double doors onto the riverside behind you. Please muster at Café Das Ami. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. This meeting is being minuted and recorded and will be uploaded to the Council's website. The Westgate Garden gates on the riverside are locked, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall via the side exit behind the glass door. And I also like to welcome back Councillor Butcher as well, who is welcome back after your civic 2 years. And Councillor Butcher was appointed to the committee at last week's annual council after publication of the agenda. Pippa, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Apologies from Councillor Jeanette Stockley, Chair.
Thank you. And do we have any substitutes this evening?
Councillor David Thomas for Councillor Stockley.
And can I ask if anyone has any declarations of interest? That's either members or officers. I'll take Councillor Smith first. Naomi Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I and 1, 2, 3 other members of this committee. I was the chair of the working group on the Older Persons Working Group, along with Councillor Carnac, who was a member, Councillor Tom Mellish and Councillor Jean Butcher. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flanagan.
Thank you, Chair. I hope to declare that a relative of mine is a tenant in one of the properties listed and noted under item 6.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Just to let you know, I don't know if it's the right time, but Liz Harvey's got a phone call at the moment. She is here. Just to
Yeah, I spotted her. That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Carnac.
Yeah, for the next item, the open space, I'm on the open space and biodiversity working group.
Thank you. Councillor Buckman.
That goes for me too as well. I'm on that group.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. There are no public speakers registered for this meeting. I should have checked whether any officers need to declare any interest. I didn't see any hands. There are no public speakers registered for this meeting. And so we move to minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of March 2025. I take it that everyone is happy with those minutes. I can take that by general assent, can't I, Pippa? General assent, please. Thank you very much. Okay. So we move on to item 6, first item this evening, which is the Older Persons Working Group outcomes and recommendations. That's on pages 10 to 54 of your packs. Considering the report of Marie Royal, Director of People, and Tracy Chambers, Head of Housing and Community. And I'm going to invite Gary Pesca, actually, to make the introduction to this report. Gary, floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be doing a brief presentation to explain the contents of the report to the committee. It worked when we tested it before the meeting. Is it up? Hooray. Yes, there we go. Thank you. Yes, the technology works sometimes. Right. Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to talk about this evening is just to give you some of the background to the review, the reasons why it was carried out, to explain what the key findings were, and to touch on the key recommendations, but also the next steps. And obviously we'll take any questions at the end. So the background to this review was a politically balanced working group, which was established, first of all, in December 2021. It's got 7 members, and it's sponsored by the Overview Committee, initially by the old Policy Committee, but it's now under the auspices of you. The scope of the review is on the slide. Looking at existing assets, their condition, etc. Whether it's still appropriate to have specially designated accommodation, which is designated by age. To look at the housing needs for that accommodation and what other registered providers are doing in the district. That's housing associations to you and me. And also looking at partnership opportunities, so perhaps with the NHS or Kent County Council, and what services are appropriate for us to provide as a landlord, a social housing landlord, and to consider financial sustainability and affordability, and to consult older people, especially existing tenants. So the reasons for the review were quite powerful, really. Our Sheltered Plus service, which consists of 4 sheltered schemes, was established, first of all, in 2018 for 2 years when Supporting People grant was ended. And the Sheltered Plus arrangement is still in operation, even though the guarantee was only for 2 years. And what makes it different from the rest of the sheltered portfolio is that there's a night reassurance and laundry service provided at those schemes. Now, neither of those services are eligible for housing benefit. And that means that they get a large subsidy from the housing revenue account. And the actual cost of the service is unaffordable to many applicants, which is why there's a need to subsidise it from the HRA. This model is replicated nowhere else in Kent. When Supporting People grant ended, all the other social landlords, and there were at least one other local authority and a housing association providing similar services to us, they ended it. And they've just been providing a landlord service and sheltered housing ever since. Some of the other issues that we were facing are the fact that our sheltered housing stock generally is ageing, and the condition is gradually deteriorating. And that means that many of the flats and bungalows are small and really quite dated. And there's a fair amount of fairly unpopular bed-sit accommodation within that portfolio. And over the years, we've seen fewer and fewer applicants on the Housing Needs Register applying for either sheltered housing or Sheltered Plus. So the key findings of the working group is that the undercharge for the night reassurance and laundry service in 2024-25 was £218,000. Now that's spread across 127 units of accommodation. So that equates to a shortfall of £139 per property per week. There's also an undercharge for staff in the sheltered schemes of £79,000, which equates to £3.42 per property per week, which is much more recoverable in next year's budget when we review the service charge arrangements. There's also lost income on vacant properties because we've got fewer people wanting to move into these properties for various reasons. The lost income in the last 2 years equated to £278,000. So in addition to those revenue losses, we've got a capital investment requirement of something like £8.7 million over the next 10 years. And Windsor House, which is our one high-rise sheltered scheme, is in urgent need of recladding and re-roofing, and we're awaiting sign-off from the Health and Safety Executive. But that's going to cost somewhere in the region of £2 million. So many of the schemes are over 40 years old, and they do feel quite dated, really. 65% of the properties don't actually meet current internal space standards. They feel small as well. And 21% are studios. And we were talking about the demand and housing needs. So at a time of huge housing need, lots of people in temporary accommodation, only 38% of those applicants who are eligible for sheltered or shelter plus want it. And properties have been vacant for, on average, 133 days, which equates to 19 weeks, which is really quite a huge amount of time, again, at such a time of great housing need. And the other point is that the Sheltered Plus schemes take the longest to relet and are losing the most income. So in formulating the report and formulating the recommendations, the working group have made opportunities for tenants and others to have their views taken into account and make a meaningful contribution to the process. And that's included the Independent Living Forum, the Residents' Engagement Panel, our resident focus group. We've had a staff workshop and also a stakeholder workshop of third sector and other organisations. And also the planned engagement as part of this process. It's proposed to have one-to-one consultation meetings with every affected resident in the Shelter Plus, at which they can have their families or their advocates present, and also the affected staff. And there will be an individual support plan prepared for each resident. So the key recommendations, they fall into two phases. Phase one is one for immediate implementation. And really, this is about service redesign. And it affects 127 households in 4 Shelter Plus schemes. So that is Langcourt, Whitgift Court, Cranmer Court, and Collard House. It's proposed that we ought to recover the full cost of services that are provided through service charges. So that means ending the subsidy from the housing revenue account. But in order to do that, it means that we need to provide a consistent service across all the sheltered and Sheltered Plus schemes, modelled on the service that's provided in sheltered housing. So that means replacing the subsidised night reassurance cover and laundry service. And it also means that we need to start thinking about access to accommodation being based on housing need rather than an age barrier, to take into account of the fact that there are fewer and fewer applicants wanting this accommodation. But the people that do live in sheltered housing, their focus group was very complimentary about it, and they value the service. So there needs to be a continued commitment to sheltered housing, but with fewer age-restricted schemes to match the housing need. So the mitigations that are proposed to be put in place for phase one are the one-to-one meetings and an individual support plan for every resident. A guarantee that there will be no diminution of service. The service will be different and provided in a different way, but it won't actually be a reduction. And the residents should actually see the benefit of lower service charges. So even though they're not paying the full amount towards the service they receive, the charges that they are paying will reduce anyway. And it's proposed to, in the short term, improve support by the Council's Lifeline service, but also looking to expand provision, including CCTV, and looking at the expansion of telecare and telehealth, simply because technology is moving forward at such a pace that there are opportunities that we can use to benefit people. And we're also looking at trying to make laundries more accessible and user-friendly for residents and carers. At the moment, there are large commercial washing machines in the laundries, and what we're doing is surveying those laundries to see if we can fit domestic, ordinary, user-friendly machines that people are used to, and to facilitate access for off-site laundry services for people who feel unable to use the laundry themselves. The phase two recommendations really focus on the longer term, and they're looking at the issues around the condition of the stock and the fact that it's dated, it's small, and a lot of it needs renewal. So it's a medium to long-term programme to appraise the options for every site, to assess every scheme objectively based on the principles in the working group's report, and to collate the results into a scorecard for each scheme, which will allow officers to prioritise the schemes. And the idea is to look at them on an individual basis rather than trying to create some sort of like master programme in the short term. And the options that will be considered include repurposing the schemes, so that's using them for different client groups, remodelling them where possible, maybe adding additional units, or even rebuilding them. And finally, sort of selling maybe one or two schemes to help pay for that development programme. But those decisions are much further down the line, simply because the options appraisals need to be done for each scheme. They need to be rational and objective. And finally, if a scheme is really successful, popular and doing well, then we don't need to do anything with it. And residents within this phase would have to be fully consulted if proposals emerge that might affect their homes or the services that were provided. So the next steps, right, tonight, Overview Committee, the recommendation on the report is to ask the Joint Chief Executives to authorise consultation of the affected staff and residents using their delegated authority. If that is agreed, then the consultation will be launched tomorrow. And on the 27th of May, on Monday, the one-to-one consultation meetings with residents will start. And the consultation period will last for 10 weeks and come to an end on the 5th of August. So the results will then get fed back to the working group, who will obviously carefully consider the outcome of that consultation. And then the working group will make recommendations again to Overview Committee, who will also have access to the results of that information. And then depending on the outcome of that, the proposal is that it could go to Cabinet on the 6th of October for a decision to be made. Right, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'd just like to say that's a really excellent report. And I know, and thank you, Marie, also, but also thank you to the working group, some of whom are here, because it does really reflect several years of really hard work. And I'm sure we'll have a really useful debate on it. Can I now invite Pip Hazelton, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing, to speak, please? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to come to Overview and just say a few words. Principally, I'm here obviously to listen to your comments and hear what you've got to say. When you've been so involved, in the working group, you feel you know and live and breathe it. But so it's really important that we get some wider views and feedback. And obviously, as the housing portfolio holder for the council, I'm also really concerned about the wider implications for the whole HRA. So I want to echo Paul, the Chair's thanks to Gary for his report and all the other officers whose work has gone on behind the scenes. But so just would like to take a moment to reflect, really. I was speaking to someone earlier and it just reminded me that I was lucky enough to have grandparents who celebrated their golden wedding, and they were like two little old tortoises, sitting in their wing chairs with their cups and saucers, and we had a royal iced fruit cake. And then I was also lucky enough that my parents celebrated their golden wedding, and they had a barbershop quartet and were bopping the night away. And I've never been married, so I won't be doing a 50 years thing. But I suppose I say that because people's expectations and aspirations have changed, and generations, as we've moved through, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds are living very different lives with very different aspirations to that of our, of our parents or our grandparents. I think there are, as we know from the data, very few people who are in their 60s now looking for that sheltered retirement accommodation that perhaps people in previous years would have looked towards. So I just want to say a couple of other things, if that's okay. Because it's a really well-considered and evidence-based approach to modernising our services, and it kind of balances financial sustainability with the needs of tenants, recognising the changing landscape of both technology and care. Standardising the service between Sheltered and Sheltered Plus brings clarity, fairness and efficiency. And the current night reassurance service, while well-intentioned, duplicates much of what Lifeline's service already provides at a significantly higher cost. And by embracing technological advances in telecare, telehealth and CCTV, we can enhance safety and support without the need for overnight staff, while continuing to ensure that central control is always there in an emergency. And the changes to the laundry service are also pragmatic. Half the tenants don't use it, yet all pay for it. Ending the subsidy and facilitating off-site options, particularly with support for the most vulnerable, ensures resources are used fairly and responsibly. So I think it's about prioritising what's essential and offering choice, preserving dignity and reducing unnecessary costs, and at the same time enabling reinvestment into where the need is greatest. So by focusing on housing need rather than age, and reviewing scheme numbers to match actual demand. It's a forward-thinking approach and would allow us to respond flexibly to the real housing pressures across our district, including the needs of younger, disabled residents. So thanks ever so much. I appreciate listening to me for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelton. And I should also just point out, we also have Councillor Mel Dawkins here as well, who's our Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change. And I'm sure she's here just for the following item, aren't you? So just to listen. Okay. We will now sort of begin the item, begin debating the item. So the recommendation is that the Joint Chief Executives are invited to authorise consultation of affected staff and residents using their delegated authority as General Section Item 3 under the Council's Constitution following consultation with the leader. So I'll open up to debate. I do need a seconder. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Flanagan. Anyone like to start off? Councillor Dan Smith, I think I saw first, and then I'll see Councillor Holt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I could just ask Gary, there was one point that slightly confused me. In the sheltered housing, you mentioned there was a gap between the satisfaction of existing tenants and the take-up of potential tenants, as in the existing tenants are happy with the arrangement, but the take-up is not great. So I wondered if there was if there had been any works done on marketing in terms of the actual waiting list and the applicants on that, of the properties that are vacant, to see if they're what exactly the needs of them are, and for them to meet existing tenants as well who are satisfied with the arrangement, because it struck me that there's a bit of a disparity there, and perhaps some of the empty properties could have been filled with a sort of flexible approach along those lines. I mean, I do welcome all the other points about extending the age and the rest of it, but just on that point, it seemed a bit odd to me. And then on a separate point, I also thought I wanted to just check that the Night and Laundry, you mentioned it's per property. Just wondered if the undercharge was per property or per tenanted property, because some of them are not tenanted, so there might make a disparity in the undercharge then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there is obviously a disparity in perception between the people that have decided to live in sheltered housing and those that are on the housing needs register. So the ones that already live there have obviously chosen it for their own reasons. Officers have made great efforts to fill the vacant properties and to interest people in those, doing things like open days, show flats, all of that sort of thing that you might expect to be more private sector oriented. And to a degree, that has been fairly successful in filling up some vacant properties, particularly in places like Cranmer Court and properties like that, which hitherto have been fairly unpopular because there are a lot of studios there. But that still doesn't get over the disparity between the aspirations of the people on the housing needs register. And there's been some interesting feedback from the focus group that we had, and also from the stakeholder group, really about changing aspirations, about people who are in their 60s. It's really, to go back to the comment that Councillor Hazelton made, that people in their 60s don't see themselves as old. Most people are still having to work until they're 66 or 67. And without being ageist, perhaps living in a block of flats with a lot of 80-year-olds isn't necessarily the most attractive option in the world. And probably, I think a lot of people have aspirations about having an additional room, a bit more space, a garden, better parking. It's no secret that a lot of our sheltered schemes are a bit dated. They don't have electric vehicle charging. They haven't got Wi-Fi. There are a lot of things that we need to do to bring them into the 21st century, really. But that still doesn't get over the fact that a lot of them are quite small, dated flats. 65% don't meet modern internal space standards. So there are some quite big, meaty issues there that we need to get our heads around when we're looking at the options appraisals for each site in due course. So that's the sort of thing that we're actually wrestling with. And in terms of your question about the finances, the shortfall has been worked out on a per property basis rather than a per tenanted property basis, simply because it's more straightforward. Because the tenanted properties are a bit of a movable feast. You know, people move in, they move out, people pass away. So whatever you do on that basis will be a snapshot in time. So it felt better to do it on this basis of, because that's the way we work out the service charges anyway, is on a per property basis.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Smith?
Yes, thank you very much for that. Actually, so on the final point you answered there, which was about the undercharge, what you're saying there then is that the undercharge is actually bigger than is shown in the figures, on the basis that we actually have empty properties, which if you added their part of the undercharge into the total, it would be bigger. And then perhaps on the other point, the reason that one really hit me, and some of the things you said, is that it's actually a two-way stream, that, because obviously the properties are dated. I totally agree with you there, and they need to be brought into the 21st century. But some of the things like gardens, I mean, I used to sell insurance, so back in the old days when I used to sell insurance, some of the old people I dealt with who lived in accommodation with both ways, were things like gardens were something that was a point where many would shift into a sheltered accommodation because as they got old, they couldn't manage the garden they had and wanted to shrink it. So you can market that in both ways if you're talking a sort of semi-private sector type marketing consideration. So just to sort of look at that possibility from both directions is something that I think may be worthwhile to go forward on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Auld was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo your comments about the report and give thanks to the people on the working group and to the officers. It clearly sets out what the issues are and the problems. I'd like to ask, the terms of reference talks about exploring partnership opportunities for work with social care and health providers. Can I ask what's been done about that and what were the outcomes of those discussions, if any?
Yes, we've had quite extensive contacts, in particular with KCC. KCC have been clear that they see Canterbury, the city in particular, as somewhere where they would like more extra care housing to be provided. So we're in conversations with them about how that might be achieved. One of the challenges that they've got, the extra care housing basically looks like an ordinary block of flats for older people, often 1 and 2 bedroom, very modern, probably with a restaurant or cafe facilities, hairdressing facilities, etc. And they normally look for a site that you can fit about 70 flats on, or 70 units of accommodation, purely for financial reasons, to make it stack up financially. KCC have identified a registered provider partner who thinks they may have found a site in the district. We're working with them. We've been supportive to try and achieve that, because we think that this sort of accommodation and the type of service that can be provided there with an on-site social care team would actually be a very sensible step forward away from our Sheltered Plus offer that we've got at the moment. It would be a much more modern offer, and it would fit in with the various benefit regimes, with things like attendance allowance, but also the housing benefit regime. And also we've been talking to the National Health Service with the idea about step up, step down accommodation to free up hospital beds and that sort of thing. And we've seen some interesting models, particularly in Ashford. So we're exploring that sort of thing. And we might be able to perhaps repurpose some of our existing accommodation to facilitate that. So those conversations are still ongoing.
Come back. I'm very interested, particularly in the last point. Our hospitals are full of patients who are medically fit, who can't be discharged because they've got nowhere to go. And here we've got accommodation that is lying empty. Surely there's a deal to be done and some innovative proposals to try and do something that would be mutually beneficial, both for the NHS and would also help this problem. So I'd encourage people to look at that very carefully and speak with the local NHS and see if we can get better use. The other thing that occurs to me is that we talk about the problems of the delay in getting lettings. Is that because we're always looking for permanent lettings? Is it not possible that we could look for, as you said, step-down accommodation that might just be on a temporary basis?
I think colleagues have been taking a very pragmatic approach, actually, about trying to get the properties relet. So that has meant very often, or sometimes, that perhaps the sort of people that have accepted offers of the accommodation aren't the sort of residents that would have traditionally gone into sheltered housing. They're often people with more complex vulnerabilities, which again brings its own problems for the management of those schemes. And probably our sheltered housing isn't necessarily the best place for some of those people. So we would be better off really trying to work with a specialist provider and to facilitate that happening within a much more structured environment. And I think that the idea about working with the NHS is really about trying to work up a deal or an arrangement whereby the NHS actually take responsibility, permanent responsibility, or for a period of time for a number of properties, so that protecting the interests of the council, we get our rental income steadily coming through, because the NHS will move people in, they will move them out, there might be vacancy periods. So we need to protect our own interests as a landlord and to make sure that the package we negotiate is a sensible one for the council. But we're trying to take all those things into account. So those conversations are ongoing.
Just very quickly, Chair, I guarantee that this accommodation is a lot cheaper than a hospital ward.
Thank you. Councillor Flanagan was next.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and then a clarification at the end, Gary. So first two questions. First of all, on page 13 of the agenda, it says about monitoring and running the personalised support plans for tenants. I wondered if you could give us a little bit more detail about who will be running that, how often they'll be referred to, reviewed, who's running that particular part of the process to make sure that the personalised plans are used for the benefit of the tenants. That's number one. Question two, on page 45 of the agenda, it says about additional health and safety checks take place at night and weekends will cease. They are desirable rather than essential activities. Could you give us a little bit of flavour what those checks are? Because I guess usually when there are health and safety checks in place, they're there for a reason rather than being desirable. Just need to know a little bit more about that, please. Third bit, clarification, is actually an apology in some ways from me, because this only clicked when I looked at the slides tonight rather than when we had a discussion last week, the Chair and Vice Chair's briefing. The £218,000, is that for 127 properties? In which case then I think the £139 is per month rather than per week. I'm really sorry, that didn't click until I saw it on the slide earlier. If it is per week, then Councillor Sol, his heart rate's going to go up pretty quickly. But I think it's per month rather than per week. And my apologies, because that didn't click when I read through the agenda previously, and I only clicked when I saw it on the slide just now.
Thank you. And I can see Gary Prescott's got his calculator out right now to double check that point. We're getting facts in real time.
Yeah, I think Councillor Flanagan's arithmetic is probably right. I took our accountant at face value, so I don't think I'll do that again.
Just glad to hear it's per month rather than per week. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still
Okay.
218,000.
Yeah, it's
Still
still
200. Perfect. Okay.
the £218,000 figure is still the correct figure. So it's still quite a lot of money. In terms of the personal plans, they will be overseen in the first instance by the independent living managers, the ILM at each scheme, and overseen by their managers as well. So we will try and make sure that there is some form of check and challenge and sort of more formal review process to make sure that they are being implemented and that they're effective. So we're very aware that we need to monitor that and make sure that the system we're putting in place does actually function. So I think the check and challenge is really going to be quite important, and that monitoring process. And the health and safety checks, they're the sort of thing that came into being during COVID. So we're talking about people going around and disinfecting handrails on staircases and buttons in lifts and things like that. So it's not done in any of the ordinary sheltered schemes. And it was certainly thought to be very, very desirable during the COVID outbreak. But since then, very few places are doing it. And quite honestly, it's continued really as a way of keeping the night reassurance staff occupied and making sure they're doing something throughout the night. And that's really why it's continued.
Thank you. Councillor Buckman was next.
Yeah, hi there. All I can see is a pillar at the moment, so apologies if I'll just talk to the wall. 2 points, I think. One was on the consultation, about how to get the right people to see the consultation in a more sort of an analog style, whether that be sort of more letters going out or and obviously larger print versions of it as well. But so it's not just digital. Actually, there's 3 points then, because my second point was to do with maybe opening up the housing to more disabled, I think you mentioned. But would that include all sort of neurodiversity and issues and conditions such as those, rather than just physical? And then my other point, it's similar to Councillor Old really, about, I understand that obviously we need to reduce the housing needs register, but would it be possible for some of these accommodations that aren't taken up at all to open it up to other authorities, as in sort of emergency housing or temporary housing, or it doesn't quite work like that? Or even if it's like reciprocal with another authority? Thanks.
Right. In terms of the consultation, most of the consultation is going to be face-to-face. So it's going to be one-to-one, and it is actually, yeah, face-to-face. So it is actually going to be one-to-one in people's own accommodation. so that they can have their friends, their family, or a third party there to advocate on their behalf. And the idea is that everything will be written down as part of that process. And there will be an opportunity for all the residents also to give us their written comments, and they can be fed in. So it's not really seen as an online arrangement in the first instance. It's trying to be geared up for the client group that we're dealing with. And we're very cognizant of the needs of those people. And it will be people that they know, they're ILMs, who in the first instance will be doing the consultation. And the idea is to make it a safe space so that people can talk to each other. And it's a two-way process so that people can talk about their fears and their needs. And we can see if we can take those on board and learn from them. The issue about more disabled people coming into the accommodation. Last year, the year before, we did a light touch review of the housing allocations policy, and that gives a little bit of discretion now to enabling physically disabled people to be offered ground floor accommodation if there isn't someone of the right age who needs it. I think that in the future, when we're talking about repurposing or looking at other client groups, maybe on a wider basis, this really sort of fits in quite neatly with the phase 2 recommendations, where we're looking at the options for each scheme and what their future use might be, whether that is sort of a mixed client group or changing the designation entirely so that it becomes general needs or for a different client group. So there will be opportunities for us to bring forward proposals in due course on a scheme-by-scheme basis. So it's handled individually and we can look at the needs. And councillors will then have the opportunity, I think, to discuss those proposed changes. And other authorities, I don't want to speak for your other councillors, but when London Borough of Redbridge were successful at Howe Barracks, that wasn't a very popular thing. So, yeah.
So you don't need to go any further. I got that. It was merely because if something is really that unpopular, obviously that sort of rate would be more of a premium, and then that could be used in theory to smarten up other things. But yeah, I totally agree that I would rather have our own housing list down. So we'll scrub that one off. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Thomas was next.
It's a question that's coming forward, and I don't have all the data. Basically, are we set up for when telephone lines go digital? And that's been mentioned before, and it's probably not in. This may be the wrong place to mention this, but it's just popped in my head. It's been in the news, and I don't know. The things like Lifeline won't work if the phone lines go digital, and that's been mentioned. I just wonder where we are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Yes, plans are in place to cater for the change from analogue to digital. There'll be infrastructure changes within the sheltered schemes that we've got, but we've also got a lot of customers who don't live within our schemes, who are owner-occupiers, live in the private rented sector. So again, it's conversations directly with those customers about the change and looking at different equipment options that are available. So please be assured that that's already being looked at. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Councillor Heaver, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Gary. My questions are a bit of a follow-up to Councillor Buckman's about the consultation side. And I know you've just touched on it, but could you say a little bit more about how the consultation for phase 1 and phase 2 will happen? Does that happen the same one-to-one consultation, or are they done separately, or just could you just give me a bit more detail on that, please? Thanks.
Yes, the phase 1 consultation is really the most imminent, because the proposals are to start the consultation straight away, because the report is now in the public domain, and we think it's important that the people that are affected, the residents and the staff, ought to have the opportunity to discuss it straight away, rather than it be in the public domain and it drift along for a couple of weeks or a month or so, and then something kick off. So we want the consultation to actually physically start meeting people within the week. And that will definitely be face-to-face. So the arrangements are being put in place. Well, people have been making the arrangements now. It's really just a matter of sort of like pressing the button and making the final arrangements, the appointments with the residents that are affected. So that will be really on a one-to-one basis. Phase 2 is a bit more of a slower burn, really, simply because it's longer term. You need to do an options appraisal for each site, and depending on the issues for each site, some might need no attention whatsoever. Others, as we've spoken about, there are a range of options. And it depends as much on the condition of the building, its popularity, the type of accommodation that there is, whether there are high levels of vacancies, whether it's expensive to run, what the maintenance requirements are. And then it's a matter of looking at what could you use either that building or the site that it sits on to do, because the council has got an aspiration to increase the amount of council housing it provides. So the idea is not necessarily to reduce the number of homes that we've got, but to increase them, but make sure that they're of much better quality and that they're meeting the housing needs that we've got. So really, to come back to your question about the consultation, I think it's going to be that it won't be one size fits all. The consultation will have to be tailored to whatever the proposal actually is for that particular scheme. And the idea would be to bring them forward on a scheme by scheme basis. So it's really about the practical approach, that it takes time to do an options appraisal, simply because you're looking at what will the site bear in terms of its capacity, what is financially viable. You know, you've got to work through all of those things. So they're not all going to be ready in one big go, one big bang. So it'll be a matter of bringing forward schemes as and when there's some clarity about what the options are, so that then councillors get the opportunity to debate those, and the consultation will then be tailored to whatever the proposal actually is, and to fit the needs of the residents.
Yeah, Marie, go ahead.
Thank you. And just to supplement what Gary has said about the consultation with the phase 1, we met with advocate services, we met with service providers earlier this week, and it's about making sure those people who are on the front line, who are seeing older people day in, day out, whether it be community nursing teams, GPs, Age UK, those advice services, it's making sure that they understand the proposals and the consultation. Because actually, on a one-to-one basis, if now that person living in our shelter scheme only sees a community nurse, you know, once a day, once a week, that might be the only person that tenant has got contact with. So it's making every contact count in terms of who's out there in the community, who's going into people's homes, just so that they understand what's happening and can give that extra level of reassurance that our staff are giving them as well. So there'll be a letter to each resident. As Gary has said, there'll be one-to-one meetings with residents. Residents can arrange to have their family members there, whatever makes that resident feel comfortable about giving an honest and open opinion and feeding into the process. And just to reiterate as well, with the phase 2, the working group have come up with a set of principles. That's what's in the report. It's a set of criteria, a set of strategic principles that could be used to look at stock renewal and provision of accommodation in the future. And as Gary says, you know, a lot of these schemes, when we look at them, it's medium to long term assessments, so nothing's happening straight away, and that would be done on a scheme by scheme basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Councillor Heaver, do you want to come back?
Yes, please, if you don't mind. I'll come back very tentatively because it sounds like 2 consultations, if you don't mind me saying so. The first one, from what I can read, I have no expertise in this, you feel a great sense of confidence that the working group have done brilliant work on this. Everybody recognises it's very sensitive if you're going to consult people about their homes and where they're going to be living, and it's very pragmatic and it's been well researched and it's going to be one-to-one, and even the way you speak about it gives us gives me a sort of warm, reassuring feeling about local residents. Phase 2, as you say, is a longer burn. It's blue sky. Nobody quite knows what the end game may or may not be. But on the slide, it says things like reselling, rebuilding. So my concern is in terms of communications and unnecessarily alarming residents that are in clearly in a very vulnerable position, that big blue sky ideas doesn't get mixed up with very pragmatic short-term needs and we alarm people unnecessarily.
No, I'd like to reassure you and the committee that in terms of phase 2, there are no definite proposals for any schemes. So that is a longer term process, and we would definitely not want to alarm any of our existing residents because there are no proposals for any individual schemes at the moment, and it would have to be a considered process to actually arrive at any firm process, any firm proposals, and they would have to go through the normal governance process as well, and there would be a separate consultation. So you are absolutely correct that phase 1 is a consultation process in its own right, and then phase 2 is really quite a separate thing in terms of the consultation, and that consultation would be there and tailored to suit the individual proposal, the individual scheme. And that would, again, as we're discussing the consultation for this particular report, if there were proposals to do anything to a scheme that meant redeveloping it or remodelling it or repurposing it, that there would have to be some sort of concrete proposals within whatever comes through the governance process so that councillors were reassured that the interests of residents were being protected.
Thank you, Gary. Very, very briefly, please.
Just for clarity, so if we are approving this, we are approving phase 1 and phase 2, whatever phase 2 may or may not throw up in the future.
For phase 1, that's fairly clear cut. Phase 2, what you're approving are the principles. So the principles of looking at the scheme, the principles of using an objective means of assessing each site, and the principles that they would be taken on a site-by-site basis. So it's really, at this stage, just saying, yes, we need to do this, and we need to do it in a sensible, objective and logical way.
Thank you, Gary. I don't see any other members wishing to. Oh, sorry, Councillor Naomi Smith.
Just because I think we're coming to the end of this, I particularly want to thank Councillor Joe Howes, who stood down last year, because Joe triggered all of this and he put an awful lot of work into a good 2 or 3 years of this working group. So I just wanted him to get credit on this as well. Thank you.
I think we can all agree on that, and we should publicly thank Councillor Howes when he was. I'm sure he's watching online. I think we can all thank him for sort of instigating this. So thanks for that contribution. I don't see any other contributions from members, so we can. I'd just like to summarise really the debate. We've talked about how council officers have, made every effort to market properties in the past, but we know that these particular properties have been hard to let and have got a higher sort of void rate. We know that KCC have been looking for new types of accommodation in the Canterbury area, and we've talked about how we might work better with the NHS as well on finding that. I think we were calling it step-down accommodation. I think that was what it was called, wasn't it? For people leaving hospital, so they do have somewhere to go. I think we made we clarified the cost as well. And we also talked about the sort of differences between what we're consulting on very specifically in phase 1 and the principles for the future in phase 2 as well. We will take a recorded vote, Pippa. And we don't have anything specific to vote on, so it will just be a recorded vote on the general comments this evening. So just to reiterate, we're recommending that the Joint Chief Executives are invited to authorise consultation of affected staff and residents using their delegated authority, General Section Item 3, under the Council's Constitution, following consultation with the leader. And that vote's carried with 13 in favour. Okay, so we will move on to the item 7. And this is the Canterbury and District Open Space Strategy 2023 to 2040. That's on pages 55 to page 104 of your pack. So we're going to be considering the report of Susie Wakeham, Joint Chief Executive, and Richard Moore, Head of Transport and Environment. And I think Rebecca Booth is here today for us. Hi, Rebecca, to introduce the report. Rebecca, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. This is the report on the Canterbury and District Open Space Strategy. And the purpose of the report is to seek the views of Overview Committee and hopefully seek a recommendation from Overview to Cabinet to adopt the open space strategy and support the implementation of the strategy. The report sets out the reason that we need an open space strategy. It's an evidence-based document of the link to the local plan policy DS24. It's a requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework as well. The majority of local authorities have an open space strategy. And importantly, it sets out the direction of future and existing provision of open space across the Canterbury district. I'll just tell you a little bit about the journey of the open space strategy up to this point. As a key document linked to the local plan, the draft local plan, it's been through 2 rounds of public consultation as part of the draft local plan, Regulation 18, once in 2022 and again in 2023. And the feedback from both of those public consultations have led to some amendments and changes and sort of strengthening of the draft strategy. And there's a little bit of an explanation on what some of those things were, one of the key ones that was that we reflected a much stronger link and the importance of biodiversity within the strategy, particularly in relation to sites like Old Park and Chequers Wood. So that brought about a positive change there within the strategy. Generally, the aims and objectives of the strategy, which I'll talk about in a moment, were well supported through those consultations. So we were satisfied that they were the right ones to take forward. In terms of the strategy itself, as I said, it's to inform the direction on current provision, existing provision, and future provision of open space, being high quality and sustainable open space, and obviously publicly accessible open space. I will caveat by saying that there was a thorough assessment done. There's another document that links to this strategy, which is the open space assessment, which was also form part of the consultation that's taken place. That's a very sort of data-heavy document, but of quite a thorough analysis done on existing open spaces, accessibility, catchments, etc., and the data from that and the sort of analysis of mapping, GIS mapping, has informed the actual strategy document itself. Because we looked at publicly accessible open space that's effectively free at the point of access, it does include open space that actually the City Council don't own. Obviously, it covers our own ownership, but there are areas where the public can access, particularly things like children's play area. It does mean that we have a limited, if any, control over those. So within the strategy, you'll see that some of the sites there are actually outside of our ownership, and it does limit what we can do in terms of influence and control over improving and enhancing those open spaces. I think that's just an important point to make. In terms of the strategy itself, we have three overarching aims. Aim 1 is to protect existing supply of open space provision to meet current and future needs within the district. Aim 2 is to enhance open space provision and features for everyone through improving the quality and the management of those sites. And aim 3 is to promote and secure new provision of open space where the current or future demand requires it. So that's open space coming forward as part of new developments, particularly strategic sites that are set out in the local plan. The strategy covers the types of open space that it looks at, and there's a list of them there. I won't read them all out. And it looks at what the current provision within our district is. And again, that's set out in the table in the report there. Gives you the amounts per type of open space and then the total hectareage and the number of sites that's spread across. One of the key elements of the strategy is to set open space standards, but in order to do that, we need to understand deficiencies and surpluses of open space within our district. Because they inform what the future needs might be. And that comes from some of the quantitative data that was set out in the open space assessment. And some of those things looked at accessibility, which are distance thresholds, aimed at improving the accessibility or the capability of the public to actually get to and access those and enjoy those open spaces. And quantity, apologies, there is a typo that says quality in the report, it should say quantity. And that is to help us establish areas of deficiency and surpluses and help us understand that existing sites may actually be able to fulfill other open space needs. So we may need to think about how hard they're working now and how we can increase their carrying capacity and whether we need to make them, in some cases, more multifunctional because they might be in key places to address a deficiency that's been identified. There are two tables. The first one is a quantity table, which sets out the current City Council adopted quantities standards for open space. What's called the Fields in Trust Guidelines, which is the sort of national guidance that we use to inform when setting standards. Current levels of provision in 2024 and the City Council's proposed open space provision by typology for 2024, now 2025. And in some of those, you'll see that we either meet the Fields in Trust standard or actually we're going over that. And the reason for some of that, particularly, for instance, as an example, natural and semi-natural, the Fields in Trust guideline is 1.8 hectares per 1,000 head of population. Our proposal is actually for that to be 4 hectares. And that in part is to recognise the value and the importance of certain types of open space in particular, and in that case semi-natural and natural, and its importance in delivering and supporting biodiversity across the district. Similarly, we've gone over the sort of Fields and Trust standard for amenity green space and green corridors, because again, we recognise the importance of actual active space and space that links across the district to other spaces. In terms of green corridors, that's more achievable on larger strategic sites where you actually do start to link up open space across sort of urban centres and rural areas. It's less easy to achieve on the smaller sites, but generally that increase in provision over the Fields and Trust guideline is to reflect the value that we place upon those types of open space. For most of the others, we are in line with the Fields and Trust guidance there. And the accessibility table looks at how far people be expected to reasonably travel before they can access certain types of open space. So, for instance, on a more strategic park and garden, for example, Westgate Parks, Whitstable Castle, Memorial Park in Herne Bay, the expectation that people will go further to reach what might be called destination parks, which have a wider range of facilities. When it gets to a more localised level, again, the amenity in green corridors 1,000, and then with play comes with very specific accessibility guidelines depending on the type of play area it is. There's 3 different sort of categories of play area. And for very localised play, it's 100 metres. For a sort of larger play area, the expectation is within 400 metres. And for what we call a NEAT, which is a neighbourhood equipped area for play, which might have a much wider range, and you might find those in more of the strategic parks and gardens and recreation grounds, people might be expected to travel up to 1,000 metres to access those. So that's the crux of accessibility standards. And again, that table sets out our proposed for 2025 onwards, and the current and the Fields and Trust guideline. We did a snapshot assessment. A number of sites were taken to be assessed in terms of quality and value. So that's looking at, it also looks at things like barriers to open space, like there may be a high quality open space, but actually you may have to get across a railway line in some cases to get to it. So that was we did a snapshot assessment of a number of sites in 2021. And from that, we drew out some of the sort of headline information, which is presented in these 4 tables, one for each of the urban centres and one for the rural. And that identifies gaps in provision and also looks at the quality of the sites and the value of the sites. So, for instance, you might have a site that's actually fairly low in quality, but actually very high in value. So a lot of people use that site, but the actual provision on site may be deemed to be quite low quality. So as an example, that might be a real priority to raise the quality of that site so that it's meeting adequately and satisfactorily meeting the needs of the people that are accessing it, because it's deemed to have be a high value to the community. Within the strategy, so I've talked about the 3 overarching aims. In order to help us achieve those, we've got 9 objectives, and linked to those 9 objectives, and they can be found on pages 18 to 21 of the strategy itself. To help us achieve those aims, there's 9 key objectives linked to a set of strategic actions for each of those. And from that is a priority site action plan, and that's included in the report. And that highlights our priorities for each of the cities and towns, and again, the rural area. What the likely timescales for delivery are, and what possible funding sources, which is predominantly through Section 106 contributions, possibly community infrastructure levy, and external funding. In most cases, we don't have capital funding for open space. So we do have some revenue within our team, but majority of those things will have to be funded from those three key funding sources. And some of in Appendix 1 of Appendix 1 of this report, which is the open space strategy, there is a list that sets out, correct that. Appendix 1 of the open space strategy itself, there's a list of sites that rate just below the quality threshold. And I've just caveated that actually, when this was drafted, this was before the Levelling Up fund became available. So a few of those sites are actually part of that project, and the quality of those will be raised through that project. Similarly, there's a few play areas that we've done as part of our either Section 106 improvements or capital play programme improvements that the quality has been improved already. One of the key sort of important features of the strategy is, in addition to existing provision, is future provision. We obviously have an expanding population within the district. The local plan sets out all of the strategic sites that may come forward. One of the challenges is, how we can make sure that open space is provided on those strategic sites, and strategic sites should be providing all types of open space on them. Smaller sites, that becomes more challenging, so it might be that they can only provide certain key types of open space, and that's where Section 106 developer contributions, off-site developer contributions come into it. And that is a key area of obtaining funding through new development in order for us to improve and enhance the quality of existing open spaces that are most likely to be used by those new population, so that we can increase the carrying capacity of those existing open spaces. Because there is actually a huge amount of pressure on existing open space to meet the demands of an ever-growing population. So it looks at those two things, ensuring that where possible, especially on strategic sites, provision is provided on the site, but where that's not possible on some developments, that we are getting the correct and the adequate amount of money for the right types of open space to meet the needs of that new population, which in turn enhances the open space for everyone using it. So it's a key source of funding that comes through new development. One of the reasons we're asking for the open space strategy to be adopted in advance of the local plan, which is still in draft form, is because if it's adopted, it's a much stronger foundation for us to use this document, for developers to use this document. All the time it's in draft form and not adopted, it can actually be challenged by developers. So part of the reason we're here tonight is to seek to have it adopted so that it has that solid foundation when we're talking to developers about open space provision, about Section 106 contributions. I think that's probably sums most of it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'd like to recommend to Cabinet option 3, which is different to what's in your reports. And it's to recommend to Cabinet that the Canterbury and District draft. It's on page 55, just to clarify. To recommend to Cabinet that the Canterbury and District draft open space strategy, as set out in Appendix 1, is adopted pre the local plan, with the strategy reviewed at the time the local plan is adopted, and delegation is given to the Director of Place to make appropriate changes as may be required to align with the local plan. I think I need a seconder for that. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Flanagan, thank you. So with that, I'll open the debate. Do I see any hands? Councillor Auld, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to say this has been a huge piece of work, and it's good reading, and thank you for that. You clarified that the strategy includes some land that's not owned by CCC, and that's helpful clarification because, for example, I noted there was a small area in my ward, Kendall Meadow Play Area, that I know actually is the responsibility of a local management committee, and there's been ongoing discussions with the parish council about who's going to fund that. So on that point, it doesn't include KCC land. I'm thinking perhaps of Church Street, playing fields. And so particularly considering where we are at the moment and where, as a council, we're headed, it seems as though that might, for entirely understandable reasons, I can see why we focused on CCC areas, but there is an additional area to be considered, which is that land owned by KCC. Am I correct in that interpretation? Thank you.
Yeah, so KCC land isn't included in the report at the moment. In terms of Church Street, I think that, I mean, we just haven't included any KCC land because it's under their control and not ours. I understand, I'm aware of Church Street open space and the sort of potential future plans for that. I think should anything significantly change, I think in terms of publicly accessible space that's for another purpose, let me give you another example. In some cases, there are open space where it's publicly accessible, but for another purpose. I mean, land at the university in Canterbury is an example of that, where its primary purpose is to serve educational needs and the curriculum. And that's why we don't include that type of thing. And I think it's a similar situation with the KCC land. I've just looked to Martin here. If you, I think that's... Yeah. So that's why it's not included at the moment. I don't believe there's an intention to include Kent County Council land in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Old, do you want to come back?
Just briefly on a slightly different but related point. Of course, within this strategy, you talk about some of the issues that are included in the draft local plan. And if we are today to vote to approve this to go forward to council, that doesn't mean we're endorsing those areas that are still subject to discussion and to come to planning committee. So, for example, the Brooklands development is included here, and I know that others will talk about the land around the university, for example. But if we're endorsing the plan, we're not endorsing the Brooklands development. And I just wonder if you could guide us through that and what that means for our vote tonight.
The chair has mentioned that actually there's a slight change in the recommendation, which is to adopt the open space strategy pre-local plan, but at the point where the draft local plan is about to be adopted, to compare the two documents and make sure that they are aligned with one another. So, for example, Brooklands is included in those lists of priority site actions. If anything was to change with that or any other site that's detailed in the draft local plan, then the open space strategy would be amended to be in line with the local plan. That makes sense?
It makes sense, but some of us may have difficulty approving a plan which has some contentious sites still within it.
I think we'll probably just try and keep the debate around the open space strategy. I appreciate the point you're making, Councillor Old. I think I'm just trying to keep things focused on this particular paper. If I'm sure people understand. Can I go to Councillor Naomi Smith next, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rebecca. You must have been on this for a number of years. Yes, well done. And I can see that with all the mapping and all of that. I mean, I do have some questions, but my main concern is the leaps, neeps and laps, which is, as you know, my pet subject. I have seen 2 large sites come up at planning with the laps shoved at the corners. It's not, I'm sorry, but I do have a bit of a background in this, and we need to be putting children at the front of our open space strategies and our planning strategies. And children want to play with other children. One of the things you put in the report is about ideally they would have natural surveillance. they should have natural, you know, I think we need to be firmer on these things. I think we need to, we don't need to be doing the KFC playgrounds that you and I know from Mariner's View. We've got, but these mistakes, they're not mistakes, but these types of play areas are being repeated. When I talk about a KFC playground, it's kit fence and carpet. It's a square of metal fencing with a springy and a bench and a bin. And they never get used, as we know, and they become a blight for maintenance. And it's just the wrong way to think about play. I brought along with me today the public space lessons, which is this is a CABE document from 2007. It's not a big document, it's only 8 pages, but it's well worth the read on it. And it comes up with some really good, strong ideas. And I'd just like us to be a bit more thinking, and it's something that we need to do within the local plan around the design, because we have a design team sort of guidance group thing, don't we? That and I think there needs to be quite a strong influence through that to put children at the centre of what we do and not parking cars at the centre of what we do on local developments, because currently there's more effort put into where the cars go than where the children can play. We have an epidemic of children who are too anxious and, you know, who don't go out, and it's because they've been through an epidemic. They've got the problems of social media in their livelihoods, and they don't play out. There's been extensive research. I could go to, when I was a child, children went a mile on their own. Now you're lucky for them to go 100 metres on their own. And it's things that do work. Columbia Park works. It's a local park in a 1970s, 80s housing estate that's overlooked on all sides. So parents are very happy to let their 10-year-olds go there on their own, you know. But you're not getting that on other sites. They're not so keen at Mariner's View because it's not overlooked. And I just think we need to really look carefully. And I want the open space strategy to reflect that in some way. Sorry, that was my bit of going on, but it is my drum I'm going to bang.
Drum heard. Is there anything you wanted to respond to? Yeah.
Thank you, Naomi. That's really valuable. And actually, I hope Mel doesn't mind me referencing. We have had discussions with Mel, because I know that you've met with Mel and Pat Edwards as well, and fed back to us on that. And there's been some really valuable information. There's quite a lot in the strategy that does actually cover, there's areas we can strengthen, but there is quite a lot in the strategy, references to design guides. The expectation is that landscape professionals and planning consultant companies are aware of all the current and relevant information. We prefer not to actually name specific design documents because they can change quite rapidly, and the lifespan of the open space strategy is quite a long one, to 2040. And actually, we feel that the local plan, being the policy, it's important or imperative that actually that sets out the standard as well, which is then reflected in the open space strategy. But we do find that there are some areas where we can strengthen some of the wording, as you've suggested, particularly around Appendix 2. And although we're not actually talking about a local plan tonight because of the links, in DS24, policy DS24, there are some areas there that we can strengthen some of the wording and make sure that both those documents align as well. So we take on board all those comments. I think it's important for us to say that we need, obviously, LAPs, LEAPs and NEAPs are the categories of play areas. We, in practice, although we can't completely rule out LAPs, and actually LAPs in some cases, because they don't have to be equipped, they can be just informal play spaces. In some challenging developments, smaller developments, actually that might become a very important area for children to gather. So we wouldn't want to rule LAPs out completely, but on the larger open spaces, in practice, we feed back and we discourage and actively encourage developers where they may have proposed a number of LAPs to actually try and consolidate those into LEAPs and NEAPs. So it's obviously got to be in line with the amount of the number of units and the new population. And I would say that we've been quite successful in doing that over the last few years. You've mentioned Mariner's View, which is probably one of the worst, a good bad example of what not to do. that was 20 odd years ago. So I say that, you know, nothing's ever perfect, but I think things have moved on considerably since Mariner's View was developed. And are more akin to the other example you used, which is Columbia Park. And again, it's covered in the strategy about putting not just children's play, but open space at the heart of development so that there is a real community feel to that. And we endorse that and we push that through every sort of planning consultant that we have. We meet weekly to look at planning applications, and that's exactly the kind of information we feed back. And we have seen some really positive changes from initial plans put forward by developers to actually what ends up getting permission. So I've got a level of confidence saying actually already those things are massively improved from examples from a couple of decades ago, and we will continue to do that. And having the strategy adopted actually gives us a much more, it really backs us up in doing that as well. But thank you for all your sort of feedback on that. It's been very valuable.
Councillor Dan Smith. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, to move completely away from NEEPs and LEAPs and so on. Naomi's specialisation, not mine. A couple of things. One of the things that I noticed about this strategy is it's very, I mean, you mentioned that it doesn't include most of the land that's not CCC's control, but the nature of biodiversity is that it doesn't care who owns the land. And there are a number of things that we can do where things link from place to place to actually assist where possible in the way we strategise or deal with the land that's not actually owned with us in planning terms or so on, to actually allow for the possibility of corridors, for example, that link things. Something along this point was actually raised by myself and seconded by Councillor Steph Dupe back last year on the 25th of April at full council, where we were talking about the land bridge between the RSPB woods and the Bigbury side. And obviously I noticed No Man's Orchard is in this thing, and that's on the Bigbury side, Charlton Hatch side of that gap, which is separated by the barrier of the road there. There are also a number of others that could be where you can link things together. So we're talking about the Old Park and Chequers Wood area. That's very, very close to the Surrey Road Park and Ride. And that centre could actually be used as an access point for facilitating it. I also noticed when I drove past there this morning that that there's a big chunk of land along the river that's up for sale. I don't know if that's part of it. I think it is actually. so 90 odd hectares of it. So that may be something that's worth looking at. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that when you're looking at the areas, you need to look at the non-CCC areas. You need to look at the total green areas in effect and try and plan to link the corridors. And if you're looking at this as a sort of biodiversity open space game for everybody, it's linking all of these areas into one gigantic movable biodiverse centre. And that, for the urban areas, the play parks and so on, gives the whole extension of that into for cyclists, children as they grow and so on, into the wider rural potential of the area. It also sells our area because it is a massive strength of our area. That if you look at it, we've got a huge amount of ancient woodland, AOBNs, the Ramsar sites and so on, that can all be integrated together into a gigantic whole and linked with the urban centres to make it accessible. So I think the strategy needs to actually perhaps emphasise that potential and growth potential of the district as a whole, as a sort of strategy to market it and as a strategy to grow it into the future, and at the same time benefit the population by allowing them to enjoy those sort of rural bonanzas, really, that by linking them up and extending them into the areas that are available in cities and elsewhere, across joining the areas up like the Old Park and Chequers Wood. And you could link those with the reservoir coming across to the Blean side as well. So I just think that needs to be added and strengthened if it can be. Thank you.
Thank you. You made some really good points there. I would point out that there are two other strategies or action plans that cover in greater detail some of the things that you've talked about. One is the Green Council's Green Infrastructure Strategy, which looks on a more landscape scale about those connections between various open spaces and what's already there and gaps where we need to link things up. So that's the document that really deals with that side of it. It is linked and referenced in the open space strategy, so they are connected in that sense. And the other one is our biodiversity action plan, which sets out our key objectives for supporting and increasing biodiversity within the district. So with the three documents combined, I think if you look at those as a whole, all linked together, that probably addresses, hopefully, some of the points that you've made tonight. The open space strategy just being sort of, part of those three documents. So it might be just worth having a look at, if you get the chance to the Green Infrastructure Strategy to see how that's set out in there, and the Biodiversity Action Plan as well. Anything you want to add, Martin?
Did you want to come back briefly, Councillor?
Just very briefly, and I think as well there's other partners who could assist in that, where things are evolving very rapidly. I mean, it was briefly mentioned about Brooklands and the university. I think one of the proposals being put forward by the wider Blean Group at the moment is about the Blean Biopark as an alternative to the development that's going on there. Something like that strategy, right in the heart of a gigantic area of our green space, would be extremely useful, because it would bring the community together in that kind of hub, create a hub in effect, to make good use of all of that green space. So there are good strategic partners out there, and this is in a very, very rapidly evolving area. So I think we need something that needs to be constantly kept an eye on and looked at again and again and again as time goes on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think we agree with you, and that's always on our radar, linking with other partners. An example of that actually is a Kent County Council Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership initiative called Stour Valley Restore. So I sit on the working group, the steering group for that, along with other authorities and Natural England and other organisations. So that's just an example of how we're already working with other partners on trying to get those links together and those initiatives come through. But thank you.
Before I bring in other speakers, I was just prompted by something Councillor Dan Smith said about accessibility and joining together spaces. And I'm just looking at page 102 and the destination parks sort of concept. Under the bullet point around good links to pedestrian, cycle routes and vehicular routes, I think a personal view would be that I think there could be more emphasis made on public transport links as well. And Dan alluded to it with the opportunity we have with the Story Road Park and Ride. But and I know, and I'm realistic that not every site in the district is going to be on a bus route that's served every 15 minutes. But I do think this would be, that's wishful thinking, isn't it? But it would be something that would be quite good to work towards, because I think one of my biggest frustrations generally is that so many of our most beautiful sites, and not just in Canterbury district, but across the country, are actually really inaccessible to people unless they have their own car. And actually it's not in our interest to just create more congestion on a sunny June day when people want to make use of open spaces. So I think that would be a little bit specific feedback from me, in line with our sort of aspirations around bus policy. Next, I've got Councillor Flanagan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back to a point that my colleague Councillor Old raised a little bit earlier, just to be quite clear in terms of the mechanics of what we're doing tonight. And Rebecca, thank you for the open space strategy. Huge amount of work that's gone into it, looking really very good. But I just want to be clear, and I think this affects all of us in here, particularly those of us on the local plan working group, those of us on the planning committee. Whichever way we vote on this tonight, because there are strategic sites, more than one mentioned in the strategy, can I have guidance, please, in terms of what that means in terms of the way we're voting? And can I have guidance in terms of, does that then be taken as a view in terms of us expressing an opinion on some of those sites. Do you see what I mean? I think we need to be really quite clear, because all the advice that we've received to date from the monitoring officer, at least, has been very clear that we need to be seen as open-minded, and therefore I don't want to fall into a trap that we vote for a strategy, and it is a strategy, but indirectly being seen to provide a view on strategic sites. I hope I've kept neutral in terms of, do you understand where I'm coming from?
Councillor Flanagan, I mentioned to Councillor Old that we're very specifically talking about this paper, but I think I'm probably sort of persuaded that we should just take a moment just to get a little bit of advice on how we should go forward. So with apologies to Councillor Old, I wasn't hopefully not being too dismissive, but I would like to just get a little bit of advice on that point. So if you'll just give us a moment.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for your patience, everyone. I just wanted to get a little bit of advice on how we proceed. Obviously, as Overview Committee, we are not decision makers, and we're passing on feedback essentially to the Cabinet. Now, what we can do and what we've agreed we will do is simply pass on comments to the Cabinet. And obviously, as you know, in the minutes, they're all anonymised. They're not attributed to particular councillors. And we will not have a recorded vote on which I think seems to be the consensus of everyone, because ultimately there are some people in this room who are on the local plan working group. There are some people, all of the councillors will ultimately vote on the local plan. So it's, I think with nods of agreement, hopefully from everyone, and I think that's how we'll proceed. Councillor Flanagan.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify then, the proposal that you made that I seconded, that no longer goes ahead. I don't want that to be seen as anti-open space or anything, but we do need to be careful with that.
If we just rewind.
Yeah, I'm being very careful. But so it's just comments then at this stage, and Chair.
I think in light of how we've proceeded with the discussion, just rewind, and that, you know, we won't be taking that particular thing forward. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we'll just go back to the list of those of you who wanted to contribute. So I think Councillor Flanagan, you made your points, and I was going to move on to Councillor Carnac.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Chair. I think that's a very wise decision, because I just think it's too early for us to be involved in deciding what's going on possible sites that are off in the distant future. So I wanted to focus a little bit on the Herne Bay section, and Martin will know, as Naomi has her parks, that I have the coastal strip. And I just wondered, the first item mentioned there is explore opportunities to enhance the quality of Saxon Shore View. And then in each one, Reculver's mentioned, or Spa Western Esplanades mentioned, Saxon Shore Views mentioned again, Hampton Recreation Ground is mentioned, and then Herne Bay Downs are mentioned. Do you think we could have an overarching section in there, which is actually for that coastal area? Because we all know that there are particular areas, and I mean, I'm sure you might want to do the same for Whitstable as well as you go through Tankerton and along the coast there, because we've got similar issues where we've got the Downs could do with a lot of extra care. Then we know that Western Esplanade has got a lot of problems, which I won't go into because you know what they are. And I just think that it might be worth, instead of having little itty-bitty things in 5 or 6 different items there, if we could actually just bring one together to pull those out as something that this council's very focused on in terms of biodiversity, and the importance of that strip. And then my second point is that I'm also wondering, there doesn't seem to be anything in there for the area north of the Thanet Way in Herne Bay. So as we know, with the Red Row estate, there are a few issues there with open space, the big reed pond that's been put in. I know, again, that's on management land, but again, we've got Castle Chases in here. In my ward, but in Greenhill there are various issues there on the and in Herne and Brewfield on the Red Row estate. The Green Gap's not mentioned, and also the other area that's not mentioned is Thorndon Woods as well, and going up through Greenhill. And I know people on that side of Herne Bay really complain that they don't have open space, that it's something very much lacking, that those of us on the north side have a lot more greenery, and we've got the coast. But as you go between Herne and between Herne Bay, on that northern area, just south of the Green Gap, yeah, there really isn't a lot of open space on some of those developments. And I wonder if that's something that we could, and Old Greenhill, even Greenhill before it's been rebuilt, there isn't a lot of parkland or open space or connectivity, and it's really being developed up there. So I wonder if that's something that could also be looked at, because it seems to be missing in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. On your first point, yes, we can absolutely look at grouping together. The priority, it was worth saying that the priorities here, I mentioned that there's an open space assessment which was done by consultants that we commissioned to do that. So all of the things in the priority site list are a result of the things identified through that open space assessment. So they are tied to a specific findings of, GIS analysis, assessments, and this, that, and the other. So they're all there for that reason, because they've come about through that assessment. I think in terms of looking at areas that you've mentioned, I would say that we can look at that, and if we feel it's appropriate to include some other areas in the priority site list, then we'll look to do that.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion, and Rebecca mentioned earlier about the green infrastructure strategy and the biodiversity plan that we're just about finishing, which is looking at local nature recovery and all of those things across the district. Some of those, I think, certainly the latter one is possibly better placed, Councillor Carnac, to address some of the things that you're talking about. And what I'm a little bit worried is the open space strategy is there very much to look at amenity and the play and the sport. And we're not unusual, but not many open space strategies have so much of a focus around biodiversity. And we did that because of the biodiversity emergency, and we wanted to reflect that. And what I'm slightly conscious of, but I'm not totally sure how to address this, is that having that focus is now possibly asking more of this document than it would normally be asked, if you see what I mean. And normally an open space strategy is normally quite a simple document. It's like, we do this, we do that. The QQA, as Rebecca said, quantity, quality and accessibility. And we look at shortfalls across those typologies. We would 100% look at it. Of course we'll look at it. It'd be very rude to say we wouldn't. Of course we'll look at it, and we'll explore those ideas. But it may still be the document that we've been working on as part of the Open Space Biodiversity Group might be a better place for that to place those. So I think the issues you're raising are spot on. I actually live within that area, so I recognise those issues. So I think the issues are right. What I just want to do is to place them in the right document. So we might reference them here or signpost here to somewhere else, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good compromise. I think as long as it's referenced, but I think it is important. And I think with south of the Thanet Way, the Green Hill area, Green Gap, and along there, that could just be that it's such a new area that it just hasn't come into the purview of the consultants yet. I just wanted to quickly add that it's really, I know how much work has gone into this, and particularly there are areas in there that have really helped me as a councillor and working with volunteers in Reculver. So I think it's a really excellent report, and I recognise the huge amount of hard work that's gone into it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Carnac. I've got Councillor Buttman next. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I just want to touch on a few things here. Some of them that you might not be able to do anything with anyway. So with sort of the new developments and the management companies, how we could sort of put more pressure on them for, overgrown land, dead trees, and then the allotments, especially allotments, because they're always on the outskirts of the development and they're left to go, unless they're taken up, which they're not most of the time, they just go to weeds. So whether they could be, whether we could offer them to parish councils or take them over ourselves to run the allotment side, because, I've got an allotment, but it's run by, I think it's Harbledown Parish Council, and it is, I know I have to mow the grass, but it is kept nice, other than that. Secondly, about resourcing on our own CCC stuff, like no plastic and in like plant pots or peat-free. I don't know whether that's in the remit of this sort of thing to look into, trying to find, people who are providing plants without the plastic pot and grown in better conditions. Would there be anything like bee boxes on rooftops, any CCC? Because you can put bee boxes on, bee hives, sorry, on roofs, anything like that. And I didn't see anything on ponds within here, because I know even where I live on Duke's Meadow, I mean, that floods quite a lot. So that could actually do with a pond in some of the dips there. And I'm sure that would take up quite a lot of the land. And then obviously the spoil could then be grown over with other things. But yeah, it was just those sort of things, really. That is everything. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Allotments, very familiar with allotments. I think it's a really good point you've raised, especially where allotments on developments and other open space isn't adopted by the council, which used to be the usual route, and that isn't anymore. It often goes into management company. We can give advice on allotments, and I've done it myself with certain allotments on new developments, but actually getting, that manifesting itself into action is the challenge. I think most developers don't really know how to handle allotments at all. And if they set up a management company, there's no guarantee that they also know how to do it. And I'm dealing with a particular one at the moment on a fairly new development. We are limited in what we can do because we don't own the land and we don't manage the land, but we can give guidance. And in the case I'm talking about now, that's what I'm doing right at this moment, and in contact with some of the actual plot holders who have raised the issue with the council. As an example, I've also gone back to planners because I think there is something for planning enforcement to look at in those cases where allotments have been provided, they're not within council ownership, they're being run by management companies. If they're not being appropriately run and managed in the right way, I think the planners need to have a look at that, because obviously they're required under policy to provide allotments if it's over a certain amount of units. And they may well have provided the physical space, but part of that is actually managing the allotments appropriately. So there is actually something going on at the moment. It'd be interesting to see how planning, I'm waiting for a response from planning, but I think it's a really sort of pertinent point that you've made there. And already we're experiencing, people coming to the council for guidance on land that we don't own and don't manage. So thank you for raising that, because I think it is important to consider. On your second point, I think most of those things, and I know we keep referring to this, are covered in the Biodiversity Action Plan, because ponds and the other things you mentioned, those are all habitats. So I think that's the better document for looking at those aspects. Oh, and sorry, yes, and the pollinator. It's the biodiversity strategy and the pollinator action plan. And also we have the tree, hedgerow and woodland strategy now. You mentioned dead and dying trees on new developments, which is actually a major concern. We now have a dedicated tree officer in post, and one of his many duties is actually to liaise and be that link between the council and developers on making sure that what they're supposed to be doing through what's called their landscape and ecology management plans, which we analyse as part of our role when we look at planning applications, is to make sure that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, because often they're not, and trees is a particular area of concern for us. So he's already kind of hit the ground running in making contact with those developers where they're actually falling short of what they said they would do in their management plans.
Thank you. I thought Councillor Mellish next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very parochial, and it's not going to be about the blanket weed on the pond in Memorial Park, which we've had extensive correspondence about. But it is about a plot of land on Beacon Road, the old hockey club, which seems to have been overlooked, as it gets overlooked a lot of times. There has been a lot of correspondence, I know, between ourselves, myself, and the residents around that area. It's 2.8 acres. It's surrounded by the residential area, so it kind of answers Councillor Naomi Smith's point about access for children, safe access, etc. Its catchment area is a vast residential area around there, and it would stop people needing to cross the Canterbury Road, which is getting faster and faster these days. I know you're aware of this site because you opposed the residents' application for village green status, which was heard by KCC in December and rejected. There are a number of projects that have been sort of thought about for the area by local organisations, including Beach Creative, who's working with the National art fund on a climate emergency project. Ideal areas. It could be used for so many things. I don't really see it referenced at all in this document, apart perhaps on page 61, where you're looking at the headline summary, and it could actually answer that. This is in Herne Bay. The area has shortfalls in quantity against most topologies, with the exception of parks, and they could well fall within that sort of area. So again, I would ask you to look at that and try to bring it into the strategy. I do have one other point, but it's not connected to this. So do you want to come back on that one, please?
Thank you, Councillor Mellish. Yeah, interesting points. With respect to Beacon Road, you're right about the village green. It was actually rejected because it was out of time, but that was the major flaw with the village green that came forward at the time. But we were also looking at that site with respect to a wider range of interests. My understanding is at the moment that the council hasn't come to a position on what the future of that site is, but whatever the future of that site is, it will have to be policy compliant along things like the existing policy OS9 in the local plan, the adopted local plan, which would be carried across into the policy that Rebecca's talked about, DS24, to get it right? Yeah, okay. So any loss of open space would need to be mitigated for, or it'd have to be calculated first as to how much it is, and that would have to be mitigated for. So any future applications or change in land use that came forward in that area would have to address those issues, and they're quite challenging things to address. Thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. And it's entirely different. It's just on definitions, really, on the Appendix 3. And I'm just wondering again why Memorial Park is defined as park and gardens, where other areas, similar areas, are called amenity green spaces. Whereas I would suggest that Memorial Park has amenities as well, including the tennis courts, the boating pond, the community gardens, etc. And can you kind of explain the difference between recreation and destination? Some again in that appendix are defined that way.
Thank you. I think there's something called, in the open space standards, there's something called primary purpose of an open space. So where you have open spaces such as Memorial Park and other similar types of open space, although it caters for a multitude of activities, so it includes outdoor sports provision, tennis courts, multi-use sports courts, the pond, as you mentioned, football pitches, amenity open space, and more formalised park and garden. We have to, it's not a perfect method, but the general rule is that you take its primary purpose, but with a recognition that it serves many of the other types of open space, and Memorial Park falls into that category. So it provides pretty much almost all of the types of open space, but its primary purpose is deemed to be a park and garden. But that doesn't preclude, we will look at a site like Memorial Park, we would look at all of those things, all of those types of open space that it provides, and treat it accordingly. It's just, if you like, almost in name only for a park and garden. And just on the other point about recreation destination, you could say that recreational space is a more localised space for informal recreation. Destination, there's an expectation of destination open space that it has a sort of a number of kind of set facilities. Destinations are things that people will travel much further to, local residents and visitors to the district alike, and the expectation is that you might find toilets there, that it might cater for all of the types of open space that are set out in the strategy, and have other types of facilities, whereas a more localised recreational space might only have some of those things, and that might be still entirely suitable for serving the needs of that local community.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Rebecca. That's useful. So basically what we're saying is that while these are defined, these areas are being defined as either recreational, destinational or park and gardens, that definition might change as the area is developed or changes. And so what I'm concerned is that they're not defined by the definition, if that makes sense.
coming on. I think things could change, and that's part of the role of the strategy, is to look about whether some open spaces that are placed geographically, strategically, need to work harder, and that might mean that actually they need to serve or offer more function than they already do. So that is a movable thing. You still have to categorise them to be able to do an analysis from the outset. Otherwise, you've just got a big blob of general open space. Yeah, it's a really good point, but I think there has to be flexibility in the provision of existing open space and future provision to enable it to transition into serving needs that have been identified that it might not currently be serving.
Councillor Brady, did you want to come in? Are you okay? Okay. Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. That's brought me two comments to make, basically. With Herne Bay Park, I'm assuming that's a destination. Can we make sure we don't shut the toilets this year? Because it's been we got families there, and 2:30 and the kids come out to play. They've got nowhere to go. I know it's vandalism and all that, but we really need to not do that this year, please. And the same with the next door to the swimming pool. You know, that's the whole the town. We need, if we've got vandalism, we need to get the police in or do something about it. So please, toilets is quite a big thing for families. Okay. And the other thing, with my planning hat on planning committee, when you said about working with the planners and stuff, where do we actually stand when we got an outline application that comes to committee and we have to agree or disagree or whatever we want to do on it, but we actually don't know what's going on there? And if there's not enough land for open space, does that mean you've already worked with the developer to bring that forward, or the developer gets planning permission and you have to work to try and fit around what's available on the site? Thank you.
On the first point, I agree with you, and I think having standards set out in the open space strategy, such as destination standards, strengthens any arguments that might come forward when other departments are sort of rationalising and look at where there may be savings. So if there are proposals to close toilets down, we can refer to those things in the open space strategy. I'm not saying that it might achieve, always achieve the end result, but certainly it puts it in a much stronger position to argue those things once it's set out in the strategy.
I'll come back. They weren't closed because they're not closed permanently. They were closed at 2:30 because of vandalism, and the kids were coming out of school and vandalising toilets. But we got cameras up there now, so we should be aware of it. It's not a question of closing the toilets, and we shouldn't be closing the toilets. I work for myself, and when I need to loo somewhere in Canterbury district, it's impossible to get to a toilet. And it's not really fair. I have to park in McDonald's and pay for a cup of tea so I can use their toilet. I think it's only fair, but it's almost impossible. But yeah, that's on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. On the point about the raised about planning, so an outline application is just the principle of the development. So it doesn't go into, it's quite a high level document, doesn't always go into the very detailed things, some of which might come through reserve matters. Much of the time, open space is delivered through reserve matters. So our team look at outline applications, and at that point, there may be things that we want to reflect back to developers through the principal planning officers dealing with the application. And then as reserve matters come through, you get much more into the detailed elements of it. And then again, we continue throughout the entire process to feed back on our open space concerns. We often feed back information and changes are made, and I referred to that earlier for the positive. There are some things that don't always go our way, but there are obviously some developments have to be policy compliant, and that is set out in the current adopted and also the draft local plan. So they have to be meeting those standards to be policy compliant. So that kind of sets the overarching requirements for development. But our team do look at them through every phase of the development, from an outline, from pre-application, outline application through to reserve matters. And we give back we have weekly team meetings amongst our whole team. So our tree officer will be looking specifically at elements to do with trees. We'll be looking at more general open space, biodiversity, linking with other corridors that's been mentioned earlier in the meeting tonight, that more landscape view of things as well. And obviously it's not just our open space strategy that we have in our minds when we're looking at that, it's all of the other strategies and action plans that we've mentioned tonight, like the pollinator action plan, green infrastructure strategy, and so on. So at every stage of the process, there is consultation with the environment team, and we will continue to feed back. We also look at landscape management plans that developers may be required to produce, and that's them setting out exactly actually what their maintenance and management of varying areas of open space and planting are. And we will pick up things there as well. It might be that they're being too vague on watering of new trees and such things like that, which is quite a common one. And again, so it's to try and get it into the best position possible. We don't get everything we want. I think we all know that, not just in planning, but in life as well. But certainly, I think we've made some really positive improvements through our consultation with planners and developers, and things are continually getting better. Through that process, of feeding back through every stage of the planning process in terms of open space.
I've got Councillor Naomi Smith. Then I'll take Councillor Heaver.
I'm not going to talk about play. It's on your tables about open space, which I guess is your 8.8 hectares. Hectares or acres? It's hectares, isn't it? Sorry, it's your open space type. It's one of the very early tables you've got about the quality. And you talk about natural and semi-natural. And I just wanted to understand a bit what natural and semi-natural was. Also, because I sit on planning as well, and we do get these applications in front of us. I know that I've looked at a couple recently. I know one that for Ben Acre that was recently passed was that there was attenuation ponds and corridor ditches and things like that. Now they're great for biodiversity, but they're not public open space because they're fenced off. But do you separate that out as those are the, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Yes, it is hectares in that table, hectares per head of population. I'll let Martin give you the definition between semi-natural and natural. But on what's attenuation, so SUDs, we are in line with exactly what you've just suggested. We feed back and we say that we will not count SUDs and attenuation ponds as open space, publicly accessible open space, unless they are actually publicly accessible. So if they are fenced and you can't get to them, and there might be a good reason for that, then a developer cannot provide it in its provision figures for open space. And that's another example of a change that we've brought about over the last few years, because there was almost a given that a developer would include the attenuation and the SUDs in that, and they were like, hang on a minute, no. So I think there have been great strides made in that, but it's quite clear cut as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, there's been many a great argument, Naomi, around that, I can assure you, around SUDs. So natural, semi-natural. In reality, we could probably scrub out, that's semi-natural. The definition of natural, there's very little natural in this world apart from salt marshes, probably, and mud flats. We don't create many of those. So the vast majority of what we're talking about there, and that 4 hectares 4 hectares per 1,000 head of population within new developments, is around species-rich grasslands, so wildflower meadows, hedges, tree planting, possibly orchards, those sorts of things. It's a little bit more complicated now because of biodiversity net gain coming in, and we also see that sitting beyond this. What we're talking about are 8, that's a mandatory thing they need to do in addition. So yeah, semi-natural is relatively broad, but it is all of those sorts of things I said around hedges, species-rich grasslands, and what have you. And we don't include SUDs in them for the reasons we said. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Heaver.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a quick question, and I'd also like to thank you for addressing those concerns raised earlier. And I'm afraid, at the risk of irritating you, I just need to put on record I fully endorse the comments made by Councillor Old and Councillor Flanagan. And whilst I'm really happy to engage positively in this really high-quality report, it in no way, on my part, means I accept or endorse any of the strategic development sites and the local plan, and particularly not Blean or Brooklands Farm, which are particularly sensitive or volatile and are subject to public debate at the moment. Thanks for your indulgence. My quick question is the National Landscapes Reconnecting the Blean project part of this? And if not, is that because it doesn't fit in with open space? It's a different type of biodiversity ambition. And if it doesn't form part of this, are you in communications with them? And could it be part of future plans?
Thank you. So I don't know whether to explain. I don't know how many councillors are aware of the enormity of some of the things you're talking about there with respect to the potential national landscape extension from Ashford right through to Howth, which is something that's been proposed by councillors in Swale. We're very aware of it. I've attended various meetings. I've reported to other officers about the movements coming forward there. One of the things that we've been looking at doing is the Open Space Biodiversity Group is going to be having a meeting where various representatives, we heard earlier about the Blean Biopark, the Wilder Blean, and also the National Landscape Extension. We're going to have a specific meeting where representatives of those groups are going to come forward and talk to the Open Space Biodiversity Group to increase the awareness of the council and its officers on some of those initiatives. And in a very similar way to, as councillors very correctly have been saying about predetermination, them coming to talk to us doesn't mean that we're rubber stamping all of that. It is very much about fact finding and understanding. A lot of those initiatives are really, really recent, so they're not reflected in this document. The most likely place they'd be reflected would be in the Emerging Biodiversity Action Plan, what we call, it's got horrendous titles, so I do apologise, but it's the Canterbury District Biodiversity Plan, a Nature Recovery Strategy. So there you go. There's quality in the title, if nothing else. So yes, we are aware, we're in discussions around those. None of those initiatives are embedded at the moment in strategies or policies. It's too early days on those. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comments, I think, from anyone. Councillor Dan Smith, and I think then we'll want to wrap things up because we do have another short item.
So, no, it's for me, not you. No. Just this time, you're next. As Councillor Buckman mentioned about the allotments, and also mentioned that he has one, I think, with Hobbledown. So just as a suggestion that one of the parties looking at allotments may well be parish councils where they're able to do so, because some of them manage the allotments that they control very well. Hobbledown being one of the parishes in my ward. So, and the second point was just to irritate Martin a little more for another bit of pen work for him. You mentioned the mud banks. I think we've talked before about the sand banks and things where the seals rest off the coast of Herne Bay. Obviously, that's part of the biodiversity structure more than perhaps what we're talking about today. But again, a reference to that as an extension out, because I think we talked. Rachel talked about the Herne Bay side and mentioned the Whitstable side with the Ramsar sites. That it's a kind of connectivity on the coastal waters, and I think that's something that's also very important, and again would potentially integrate into all these other things that are perhaps being talked about now more recently. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely note your comments, and I hate to repeat myself, but the coastal connectivity that you talked about, there is a chapter, sorry, not there will be, there's absolutely a chapter in the our nature recovery strategy, biodiversity plan around the coast. We've had meetings with stakeholders around that, and we've also taken some of the learning from the Kent local nature recovery strategy that's been out to consultation. So we're sort of cherry picking from that, but also supplementing it with local knowledge. And the Herne Bay Museum have been very involved in some of those discussions with me as well. So yeah, I acknowledge your point. It's quite limited what we can do, but we can acknowledge the importance of them for a start.
Thank you, Martin. And I think we don't have any other contributions. I'd like to wrap that up there. We aren't going to take a report. We are not going to take a recorded vote. And we are just going to take all of the comments in the usual way. And Pip has been very diligently sort of noting all of the comments and a summary of those. I think we heard a lot of points tonight in that particular debate around sort of particularly around standards, around things like play areas and how we sort of categorise some of the land, particularly around the coast. And talking about accessibility as well, and how we might want to sort of be more specific about joining up certain spaces, perhaps. And we talked about one or two specific sites as well, and talked also about how we sort of consider the typology of different types of open spaces. So there's no vote, and we will. I think that means we can move on to the next item. So Bill has been very patiently sitting here for the last couple of hours. And I'm sure enjoying all of the other items. Item 8 is the working group update. Thank you very much, Martin and Rebecca. Working group update to 2025-2026. That's on pages 105 to 133 of your packs, and we're just considering the report of Susie Wakeham and Peter Davis, Joint Chief Executives. I'll invite Bill to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. This is the annual update report for working group activity, which provides you with an opportunity to set the programme for the coming year. The report proposes that the Overview Committee continue to sponsor the Older Persons Accommodation Review to a conclusion and undertakes the Access to Customer Services Review, which has an important role to play in considering the way customers receive our services. We have already held an all-councillor briefing and intend to gather views and opinions. Overview Committee and Cabinet are both able to propose 3 reviews in any given years, but as the report notes, both councillors and officers have struggled to find capacity to undertake that many. Recommending 2 appears to offer a more pragmatic approach currently, supplemented by councillor briefings. Since the last update, we have had to prioritise the council's response to the local government reform, LGR, which has fundamentally changed the way we plan for the longer-term changes working groups are designed to bring about. As a result, you'll note that Cabinet is proposing that the working groups looking at our visitor economy and the local and circular economy should not go ahead. Instead, for this year, it is proposing a shorter review on short-term lets and support for the local plan process. After that, it has indicated that any working group activity will be in support of the local government reform process. The proposal, therefore, is to endorse the current programme of 2 reviews and to not take forward any further reviews once these are completed, save for work required to support local government reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. We're going to resolve, I'd like to resolve that the Overview Committee sponsored reviews for 2025 and 2026 are as follows. Firstly, the Older Persons Accommodation Review Working Group, and secondly, the Access to Customer Services Working Group, and that no new working groups are put forward once the current programme has been completed for the reasons Bill's given. And to note that Cabinet will cease its formal programme of working groups and will delegate authority to the leader in consultation with the joint chief executives to form short-term task and finish groups as required for the purposes of local government reorganisation, and that the visitor economy working group and local and circular economy working group be cancelled to provide additional capacity for local government reform. A short task and finish review on short-term lets will be completed this year. I think I need to see a seconder on that as well. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Seconded from Councillor Flanagan. I think his mic's not working. Ah.
Seconded, Chair.
Seconded from Councillor Flanagan. Thank you. Anyone have any comments on proposals for working groups? Councillor Naomi Smith.
Just a quick question. So there could well be, I could foresee that with LGR, there could be a task and finish group maybe looking at assets and disposal of assets. So would that fit within the LGR task and finish groups? That's just what I'm asking.
Potentially, yes. We're still at such an early stage within the process. It's difficult to be definitive on that. And I think we're trying to just be pragmatic and flexible in our approach here. We're just conscious of the amount of work that's being taken up in this process and will be, and it will gather like a snowball as we go forward. So I think we're just trying to take a pragmatic response to how we handle working groups.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments? No? Going once, going twice. Sorry, Councillor Heaver, was that a hand? Go for it.
I'm really sorry. I know you don't want to comment, and I'm the novice, and it might be a stupid comment, but obviously, could you explain a bit more about the potential loss of attention to the local economy and the local circular economy by cancelling the group? I thought it's an obvious question, so obviously it's probably a stupid one, but I'll ask it anyway.
Yeah, I suppose, Councillor, it's not suggesting that we ignore them. I think it will just mean that if work proceeds on them, it will not be done through the auspices of a working group. So we will be working closely with Cabinet, for example. So Councillor Cornell, who was involved in the formulation of this paper, who looks after this area of activity, is very active in this area and will be working very closely with both other fellow councillors, with Cabinet and with officers to make sure that there is still focus in these areas. They just won't manifest themselves through a working group sort of process.
I was just going to add on that point. Is there potential to have collaborative working with other East Kent local authorities if we do go into a unitary authority situation? That might take off some of the load from our own officers and our own councillors if it means we sort of have delegates to a group, those sorts of arrangements.
I'm sure that those options are being looked at currently, and as the shape and form develops, we will definitely be having those discussions. Yeah.
We will take a recorded vote then, if there are no other comments. And this is to approve that recommendation. And that's passed with 12 in favour and 1 abstention. So the date of the next meeting is 7 p.m. on the 12th of June 2025. There's no other urgent business that I've been notified of to be dealt with in public. We don't need to exclude the press and public, and no other urgent business. Meeting closed at 21:31. Thanks, everyone.